All right. So what we did yesterday, right? Yesterday we went ahead and saw some important concept. Okay. So the concepts were very much related to the decision making and the control flow of a program. So how can we make a program to execute in a particular format or in accordance with the algorithm that we have designed for a program to execute. Okay. So depending on certain logic, depending on some decision making, you want to control the flow of your program. So there we are going to use if, elif and else statements, and also we talked about loops. In that loops, we went ahead and understood the for loop, for in loop in particularly. Okay. Now, let me give this an example. Okay. Now, what is this example is doing? This is in related to what? This is a for loop. Okay. So now what this for loop does, so initially I'm defining a range. Range would return me a list, and that list would contain from between 0 to 10. I'm going to select and skipping 2 for every iteration. So for which means this particular list will contain 0, 2, 4, 6, and 8. These are the elements that the list range would contain. And now for each element as a part of this list, it is going to iterate. Our for loop is going to iterate for every even number in this list, because this is a list, right? This is basically a list. So for this list, I'm going to iterate like for first even number, which is I'm taking the 0. 0 is in the list. From the list, what I'm doing, I'm printing that. And then I'm going to print, then it will go to the next item or the element, and it will be selected and assigned to even number, and then it will be printed. And then next item will be element will be picked for, and so on so forth. It is going to print all the elements that are available in this list. Okay. Now let's go ahead and understand a few other things, or I can go ahead and understand another loop which is known as while loop. So now what does while also does? While also will help you to iterate through the loop. Okay. It also does the same thing. Like for example, what I can say, let's say I is equal to 0. While is a keyword. While I is less than 10 colon. Okay. And then my while block of code will start, and that needs and this indentation of this tab should be there, or you can give a space which is more than one space, that is also fine. So this is where your block will start. Or in other programming languages, how it is going to start, it will be in, this will be the condition, and then the flower brackets would start. Okay, like for example we have seen in JavaScript. But in Python this is not the case. Flower bracket does not form the block of code here. Instead, there will be colon followed by the indentation. If you see, if I hit enter, it will automatically, this space would be given. That is called indentation. Okay, then I am going to say print I. Okay, so what it is going to print? So first initialize I to 0, and then I is less than 10 until this becomes false. Until the condition becomes false, this while loop will execute. Okay. So now then this is the condition, this is the initialization, but there should be certain increment. I need to control the flow, right? And for that, what I can do, I can give uh, I plus is equal to 1. So what I'm trying to do here, I plus is equal to 1 with, this is nothing but your assignment operator. Okay. And then if I execute, what it is going to print, it is going to print from 0 all the way to 10. Okay. Less than 10, because this is the condition. The moment it is 10, then this condition fails, it will exit the while loop, and it is going to print me this. And even if you see the print for statement, right, print statement, if I put the key here and press shift tab, it is going to give me certain details about this. If I give within the parentheses, what are that? So if you observe for the print function, because print is a function or a method in Java, in Python. So if you observe this, End is equal to backslash n. This is an escape character for a new line. So whenever it prints, it will print to the new line. So for this, what I'm trying to do, if I go ahead and say comma end is equal to, within the single quotes or double quotes, both is fine, I can give space. So it is going to print, and end of the print would be the space instead of backslash n. Backslash n is a escape character for new line. So instead of this, because this is by default, okay. But now what I'm trying to do, instead of new line, I'm giving a space, and this will print in one line. The end of line will be a space here, so it will print 0, then there is a space treated as end of line, and then next iteration one will be taken end of line, one will be take 2 3 and so on and so forth. Okay, it is just the way I wanted to print in one single line rather than taking uh, every element into the new line, every print into the new line. I'm just printing it in a single line. The end of line would be treated as space. All right, so now to understand here, this is the how the while loop works. It's the same way like any other programming language. Until this becomes false, the while loop will continue. The moment it becomes false, it will exit the while loop. Now, these are the two major loops that we can understand in Python. One is for in loop and another is while loop. Now, there is also something we need to understand here is these keywords: break, pass, and continue. So what are these? These are the keywords that are helpful and are associated pretty much with the loops. And you can also use them in if conditions as well. That is also fine. But its its major usage is in the loop, when to break the loop or fine tune the loop, basically. So now, what is this break statement will do? It will break out of the loop, which means it will, whenever if you are in a for loop and it is iterating n number of times and you want to break at a certain condition, you can exit that for loop once that condition is reached, and that can be done using break statement. And what is the skip? What is this continue will do? Continue will skip the remainder of the current loop, which means if there are 10 loops in the there are 10 iterations that the for loop will execute, but on a sixth iteration, I don't want to execute the next statements. I want to continue with the next iteration. So that can be done using continue. And pass is kind of a null statement. Nothing happens when you give a pass. It will just continue with the next iteration. It will flow and then continue with the next iteration. Now let's understand these one by one with an example. Okay, now let's take ahead. Yesterday we talked about the same. Okay, what is this? This is the thing that we want to see. What is this? This contains even numbers starting from 0 to 9, where 0 is not an even number. Now, what I want to do, I don't want to print 0. So how can I achieve that? There are multiple ways you can achieve that. But what I am trying to do, I am trying to make use of this, one of these. Let's see what happens. Like if even num is equal to 2. Sorry, if even num is equal to 2, what I want to do, if even num is equal to 2, I don't or is equal to 0, let's say is equal to 0, I don't want to print it. So what can I do? I can just say continue. What this will happen, the moment it is 0, when my for loop executes, the moment it encounters 0, it is not going to print it, because continue will skip that iteration. So that iteration is skipped. Instead of printing it, the moment it encounters continue, it will go to the next iteration. It won't continue with the for loop statements following the continue. So here it will stop the execution of that iteration, which means it will skip the iteration and continue with the 2. Then 2 will be printed, 3 will be printed, 4, 6 and 8. Okay, that is the usage of continue. Continue will help you to skip a particular iteration, only one iteration, and then you can continue with the rest of the iterations. While, like for example, I just want to print only 0, 2, and 4. Okay, the moment it is 4, I don't want to print the rest of the things. So what it means is, or for that matter, let's say I just want to print 0 and 2. That's it. So what I can do, the moment it comes 4, okay, I don't want to continue with the iteration. At that time, I'm going to use break. So break, what it will do, break will exit the for loop. So this for loop will be exit the moment it encounters break. So first it will go for the first iteration, pick 0, and 0 will be printed, and then it will go even number will be even number even num variable will be picking the next element, which is 2. 2 is not is equal to 4, which is false. Then it will again go ahead and print this, because it won't go to the next break statement here, because if condition will only be whenever this condition is true, only then break will be executed. So the moment 4 comes, even number is equal to 4, then it will enter the break. you know uh, w- this if statement, the indentation is here. Okay, and this indentation is for what? This indentation is the for the for loop, and this indentation is for the if loop. Okay, if statement. Okay, if decision making. So now the moment it is 4, it will break and exit the for loop, so it not even going to print the even number. So in this case, it is only going to print 0 and 2. Let's execute this. So 0 and 2 is printed, the rest of them is not printed because of this break statement. Okay, it will exit the for loop. So now that is again one of the usage of break statement. Now what is another thing? That is something called as pass. Okay, so just I'll give pass here. The moment I give pass, this is as if like a null statement. Okay, it won't do anything. It will continue and print everything. But what is the use? So why do we need a pass then? We need a pass because this is kind of a placeholder. Later, during your programming, right, you are writing a big module, and you don't know what if condition block of statement should be written, and you will put a placeholder like pass and then continue. And when you know what logic need to be put, you can go ahead and add it here. So one usage of pass is, it acts as a placeholder. Suppose if I don't put this, okay, let's say if nothing exists here, I have just a if condition, which is if even number is equal to 4, then I don't do anything. I'll just go ahead and print. Okay, now you observe there will be an error. Okay, so what this error will be? Indentation error. What is this indentation? Currently occurring at a print. Why? Because you have written a if statement, it has a colon, but there is no indentation, there is no block that need to be executed for if statement. Okay, so this if statement is expecting a block, which is indentation. You need to write something here, you need to write a piece of code. If this is not written, then this indentation error will occur. Indentation runtime error will occur. So in order to avoid these kind of errors, indentation errors, you actually make use of pass, where because you can reserve it for the future, reserve for future code. So whenever you get a some logic, okay, then now if you execute, there is no problem, you will execute the entire statement. Okay, so that is the purpose of pass. Did you guys understand this? What, how pass is different from break, and break is different from continue, guys?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So now with that understanding, right, let's go ahead and continue with our functions. So now we will understand something called as functions. So what is this functions? Let me go here, go to the workbook. So now can anyone answer me, what is the need of functions? Why do we need functions in the first place? Can anyone answer this, please? Why do we need functions?
To execute a particular statement.
So, for executing a particular statement, even anything is any statement is fine, right? I is equal to 1. This is also a statement. I'm executing this. Okay. This is also fine. I'm executing this. But why we need a function?
Sir, to use them, repeatedly.
So, to use them repeatedly. Yeah.
I mean,
When
once if you declare something for as a function, you
Mhm.
can recall it, sir, so that we can use it many times.
Yeah, that is good. That is absolutely correct. No doubt about it. But that is part of your usage of your function. So now that is right. You can reusability is one of the key aspect of functions. Okay, and what else? One usage is obviously reusability. So you can write a piece of code and you can call that piece of code multiple times wherever you want to use it. That is one of the major benefits of functions is reusability. And the other is major thing is readability. So now these are the two major. I know multiple things are there in order to you can create modules, you can do all that, and all that is fine. But major usage, major benefits of a function is reusability and readability. So what it means is one thing he's defined that reusable a small piece of code you have written and that can be used multiple times in your application because application like for example a Twitter application, it might be a very huge application with a lot of lines of code, and each function, like for example just to print the post the tweet on the page, there is a function, okay, to post, and a lot of users come there, log in there and use the same functionality on the Twitter to post it. Okay, one usage is you can write a function to post a tweet, okay, and multiple times it increases your usability, and at the same time it increases your readability of your application, because in a actual real-time scenario in any noted application there is a lot of people working on the same piece of code, okay, and in a multinational companies or an organizations, the same employees who are today might not be there 5 years down the line, okay, because of the attrition, a lot of people change companies, go around, and for a newcomer who comes to the organization, the readability of the code is very important. Okay, so in order for them to understand what the code does and everything, for them to utilize and see if it is written in a functional or modular format, then it becomes very easy for a newcomer to read the code and understand that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and see one simple example. Suppose I want to say, let's take f name is equal to let's say Elon, okay, and L name is equal to, I'll say, Musk. Now, full name will be equal to F name concatenated with a space, and then I am concatenating with L name. Okay. Now, let's say I want to print full name. So, what is happening here? So, every time I am going to do what? I am going to this particular function. So, what it is taking, using the first name and last name, I am trying to generate a full name. Okay, this is a simple functionality. Okay, now just f name variable, full name and the last name can vary for individual users. So Prajwal, here it can be Kulkarni. Okay, so now for as the user changes, The obviously the full name changes, the f name changes, and everything. So now, in order to increase the usability of my module, what I'm going to do is I can put this piece of code in a particular function and call this function every time I'm going to use it. Okay. Now, this might be like this. Let's take this example. Def is a keyword in function, keyword in Python, which is nothing but for defining a function. So in other programming languages, like for example in JavaScript, right, we used to have something called as function, and then there is open and close parenthesis, and then there are curly brackets. This was the way that we used to define a function, and here I can give a function name. Function name might be like for example, create full name. All right, this is my function name, this is a keyword, and then it has an open and close parenthesis, and then I'm going to have a curly brackets where open and close, and here I am going to give my block of code. All right, so this is the way that is followed in C or in JavaScript or any other programming languages. But in Python, the actual way that we are going to do a function definition or declaration. Okay, function definition, also known as declaration. Okay, so this is where your function is defined. So for that you need a keyword called def. Okay, def means define a function. So define a function followed by the function name. Okay, I need to give the function name, open and close parenthesis, followed by colon. Okay, and then the moment I hit enter, the indentation will start. Indentation means it is the block of code that will start for this function. Here I can go ahead and write this particular function. All right, now what is this I'm doing? Create full name. Okay, so the what it will do, this function I have defined or declared this function where it will have a full name, a first name, last name, full name, and it is generate a full name and print the full name. And now this is called as declaration or function definition. Now this is not executable in Python or in any language. The definition or declaration can never be executed until it is invoked. So next, what we need to do is function invoking or calling. We call it as function invoking or calling. Function invoking, or also known as calling a function. Now for that, what you need to do, you just need to give the function name with the arguments if it exists. That's it. If it doesn't exist, the function doesn't, this can be written in small letters. Okay. Because there is particularly this need to be written in small letters, because there is a convention in Python where if I write it in caps, right, it will be a class. Okay, now I will come to that later, but now let's follow this. But nothing wrong in it. The syntax would be absolutely fine until it execute the code, but it's a normal practice. I want you to refer to this something called as PEP8. Okay, just refer to this PEP8, which is nothing but a Python. If you go PEP8, right, it will give you the good usage of Python. PEP8. Okay, so just go here. This is a style guide for Python. Okay, you can go ahead and see some of the best use cases and how to use Python, and everything is organized here. Just go ahead and search for yourself PEP8. All right, so yeah, with that being said, let's come here back to our functions. Now this is called the function invocation. Okay, now what is done here, the moment I execute this, what will happen? It will print the full name. So couple of things are happening here. One is function invocation or function calling, and then there is a function definition or declaration. So always the function declaration or definition are never executed until it is invoked. If there is no invocation or calling of a function in a application, then this function declaration or definition will become a redundant code. It is never used. Okay, it can never be used until it is called. This will become a non-executable piece of code. It will never execute. So for this definition or declaration to be executed, there need to be a calling of a function, calling or invocation of a function. All right. So now this is one way to understand your function. Now let's take it a step ahead and see what else we can do in function. So suppose this is every time this function will print Elon Musk. Whenever I call this function, it will only going to print an Elon Musk. Now, what about if there is a separate user that I need to print? Okay, so in that case, there need to be certain arguments need to be passed and parameters need to be defined where I send the arguments and function declaration has parameters which will capture that. Okay, now let's understand that one by one. Now, let me take this same function. In this function, let's say f name, okay, and then there is L name. Now, so what I have done here, I have removed these initializations. Okay, f name is equal to Elon, last name is equal to Musk. I have changed it. I have removed it. And now what I am trying to do, I am created these f name and L name within the curly within the parentheses, and these are called as parameters. Okay, parameters are defined within the parenthesis and separated. If there are multiple parameters, they are separated by a comma always. Now, in this case, there are two parameters. And now, if I go ahead and invoke this function, if I execute this function, so what will happen? Type error missing two required positional arguments. Okay. Now, the keyword here is arguments. What it is saying, type error, this function is trying to invoke without the arguments. So, it is expecting an argument in this place. And what are those? Why do why is it expecting two arguments or two missing arguments? Because f name and L name are defined as parameters in your function definition or declaration. Okay, so for that I can go ahead and directly pass a value or I can pass a variable. Either of them is fine. Now for example, let's say first name is equal to, let's say, non, and then last name is equal to Musk. Now I can go ahead and give f name comma, I can go ahead and pass last name, and if I execute it, now what it is printing, Elon Musk. So now these two can be fed from the input. Okay, I can go ahead and say I can put a input statement. Okay, I can put a input statement and say enter the first name. Okay, I can take it from the user, or this can be fed from the database itself, or this can be fed from the input form from the screen. Okay, this can be multiple ways the user can capture the first name and last name. Like for example, I can say enter the last name. Okay, now if I go ahead and execute it, what will happen? It will ask me enter the first name. Let's say it is Rohit. Okay, and then it will ask me enter the last name. Let's say it is Patil, and then if I execute it, it will give me Rohit Patil as my full name. Okay, now so there are two things that you learned in this exercise. What is that? One is you're passing that there are something called as arguments. Arguments are always associated with function calling or invocation. Okay, arguments are associated with function calling, whereas parameters are associated with function declaration or definition. Okay, so here they are called as arguments, here they are called as parameters. Now understand that these parameters, right, they are only local to this particular function. Okay, so they are not, that is the reason these are called local variables. They are only local to this function, and they are not anyway related to the rest of the module or rest of the application. Okay, now for that reason we have created these variables which are available outside of the function, which is called first name and last name, and they are taking the input from the user. Okay, so now let's, what you understood here is parameters and arguments, and how are they different. Arguments are related to the function invoking or calling, whereas parameters are related to the function definition or declaration. Now with that being said, let's see another thing that I want to do. Now what are you trying to do here? You are trying to print every time. Okay, now you are trying to print this every time on the function itself. Now I don't want to do it. I want something to be returned from this. Okay, something to be returned from this function. So currently there is no value being returned from the function. How do I note that? Let's say if I assign this to a particular thing. Okay, function rtn is equal to, now I execute it. Let's say I'll enter something. That's fine. Now, if I go ahead and see type of this, what is it saying? It is saying none type. Because why is it saying none type? Because nothing is returned from this function. This function is being called. Okay, it is invoked, and the invocation is landed here. But the execution of this function has not transferred to this invoking. Okay, nothing has transferred from here. You are sending two variables which are captured through these inputs to the function declaration. Then the function declaration will capture those two, first name and last name, and it will create a full name, and it is directly printing here, and it is not returning anything back to the function. That is the reason your function return is of a none type, which is none. It is capturing the value none. And now there is another concept related to the function called as return. So now what is this return? Return is again one of the keyword in Python which will return a single value at a time from the function. Okay, now in this case what I want to return, I just want to return the full name. Now if I capture this just full name, okay, that's it, I'm not doing anything. Now if I execute this, it will say let's say Rohit and Patil. Okay, now what is happening, it is taking the input, and this is also taking the input, and it is function is invoked, and the full name is generated, and this function is returned the full name, but it is not printing anything because there is no print statement that I have added. But there is something called as function return. Let's see what this function return is now. Now if you observe, the function return is of a string type. It has changed from the none type. Now if I just print the function return, okay, what it will print, it will print the first this is full name, because this function is returning the full name, and this full name is returned by this function invoking, and that return value is captured in this variable called function return. And when I see the type of function return, and this is giving me of string type, whereas the function itself, function return itself, is containing my full name. Here I can now go ahead and print function return, which is just simply a function return whatever the value that I'm capturing. And now if I go ahead and execute it, Rohit Patil, and now it is printing Rohit Patil because of this statement. Now, fine. So what happens here? I've just hard coded it. Now that you understood what is function definition, function invocation, what are arguments and what are parameters, and what is a return statement. Now, let's take one example here. What happens is, now that you know in a function there are finite number of arguments and finite number of parameters that are exist. You know exactly how many are there, 1, 2, 3, or 10. But what if you don't know in your program itself that how many parameters and arguments would come into place? Okay, at that time there is another concept in Python that is called as args and kwargs. Okay, now this args is for arguments with a single star, and double star kwargs, we call it as kwargs, is key word arguments. Okay, that is what it stands for, and it always has two asterisk marks, whereas arguments has got only one asterisk mark. And what it means is, this argument stands for a sequence of arguments. Okay, it is a sequence. It can be n number of a sequence can be a list, it can be a tuple, or it can be a string as well. Okay, and string of characters. So this is called as a star represents a sequence of parameters, whereas a sequence of arguments, whereas double star represents a these are the arguments of keyword type. So these are the dictionaries. Okay, keyword is nothing but your key value pairing. All right, there is a key and value associated with it. Now let's understand with this example in a while. Before we go to arguments and keyword arguments, let's understand what if there is no initialization of this function parameters. Okay, now for that we also call this as default params. Okay, which is you are defaulting the parameters. For that, let's take this already existing example. Let's say this one. So default parameters or arguments is when you are going to give a initialization for those parameters. Now, for example, let's say you are defining a function which is going to uh, um, or I can say, let's say, as add numbers. Okay, simple. Add numbers, and these numbers are maybe num1 comma num2. All right, and they are going to return me a total is equal to num1 plus num2. Okay, simple. And it is going to return me a total. Okay, now this is what my function would look like. I mean, simple function definition, and it has got what statements which will return the sum of two numbers. Now, let's say if I go ahead and call 12 by 12, and this is should return me 24. Okay, that is what we are expecting. Now, suppose I have not given this parameters itself. Suppose I have invoked this and I execute it. Now, what happens? There is a type error that will say it is missing these arguments. In order to avoid these kind of errors, we need to do what? Defaulting the params. We need to set a default value to these params. Like, for example, this might be equal to 0 and this might be equal to 0. Now, even though you are not passing any arguments, whenever the function is invoked, it will reach this function definition, and it will see number one is initialized to 0 and number 2 is initialized to 0. So this total is 0 would be returned rather than throwing you an error. Okay, and that is the best use case for your defaulting the params. So defaulting is you are setting a default value for the parameters in case you have missed the argument passing. Okay, or there might be one argument you passed and you have didn't pass the another argument. Here what will happen, this one will be treated as number one, whereas number 2 is missing here. So that is the reason this sum will return 1, because num1 will be 1 and num2 is 0. Let's execute this. So this will return 1. Okay, and now if I say comma 1, okay, so now or for that matter comma 5, for that matter, if I execute this is not going to work. Why? Because what is happening, I am trying to not give a value for the first argument, whereas I am trying to give the second argument. This is not going to work because this is not you're doing unknowingly. You're doing it intentionally. Okay, then that is a problem. Okay, now in this case, either you don't give two or you give at least one. At that time, this will work in a perfect situation. So ultimately, what we are trying to do is you are trying to give a default value to your parameters when one of the arguments you have missed it, or both the arguments you have missed it. This is called defaulting the params, and you can give it somewhere here on your function definition where your parameters are defined. But even though you have defaulted it, but you have changed the value such as 12 and 13, now it won't take the default values. It will take the actual values that are past 13 and 12. This will be becoming 25. All right. So make sense, guys. What is defaulting of parameters? Now, let's go ahead and understand what we talked about kwargs and args. Okay. So why are these needed when we don't initially know how many arguments the user will pass? This is a very best case when you have your inputs as a string, an array or a list. Okay, list in Python, or it might be an dictionary that you want to pass. Okay, this is always ongoing for any module. At that time, you don't know how many parameters will be passed. You don't know how many arguments need to be passed accordingly. At that time, you are going to use this generic way of using the number of arguments. You are representing star args. Representing what? Star args represents the sequence. Okay, expand this as sequence. Star before that means expanding them as a sequence, whereas double star or asterisk means expanding them as a dictionary, which is key value pairing. Now let's take this example. So you are defining a function which you are saying as catch all. Okay, catch all is a function name, and you are passing two parameters, star args and double star cogs. Okay, now you are printing arguments. You are printing all the arguments, and then you are printing all the keyword arguments or cogs. Now suppose this is where your function is invoked. Okay, what is this invoking? 1 2 3, and then you are invoking a is equal to 4, b is equal to 5. So what is this? A is equal to b is equal to, this is representing the key and this is representing the value. Now let's take this example. I'll just copy this for your ease of understanding. Now suppose this is what I have, a function definition. So catch all is a function. It is passing the arguments and it is passing the keyword arguments. I'm just printing whatever is being passed. Now I want to call this function catch all. And now this can be like 1 comma, I'll say a is equal to 2. Now what I'm passing two values. There is a one value and this is another value. Here, this will be treated as arguments because this is a sequence of numbers. I can take this will be passed as it will print first one and then it will print cogs, which is a key and value. So if you observe here, this is just a simple example where I am taking only one as an argument and another as a keyword arguments. Now this can expand to as many as you want. Okay, I can go ahead. There is no limit, and this can go ahead and expand to anything that I can go. Okay, it doesn't matter. Only thing is my key should be unique. So I'll give B. Let's say I'm going to give C. I'm going to give D. I'm going to give E. I'm going to give F. Now, if I print this, this is absolutely fine for the function. So the same function now, irrespective of how many arguments that I am going to pass, this function will work absolutely fine because of these two, star args and double star cogs. So this is when the best case usage for this particular is when you don't know initially how many arguments the user will pass. That is the time when I'm going to use star args and double star quags. Okay, did you guys understand this?
Yes, sir.
So what is the lambda function? Lambda function is nothing but a anonymous function. Okay, it is a short function where it can have multiple arguments or the parameters but only one expression to it. The syntax for this is very simple. You have a keyword called lambda, and then these are called the arguments, colon, and then there is a return function. Like for example, let's take this example. The same example. So what is this example doing? Let me do this. So what is this example doing? It is taking the two numbers and trying to sum it up and give the value, return value. Now, let's take the same example, create our lambda function. So what is this? I can go ahead and say add num is equal to, the first thing that I need to mention is lambda. Okay, lambda is the uh, uh, this one. I mean, lambda will be your keyword. Okay, lambda followed by num1 comma num2 and then followed by colon. All right, then you are going to say what is that I am going to return, num1 plus num2. So what is this trying to do here? If you observe here, I'm taking a lambda as a keyword and then these two are on my arguments. Num1 and num2 are my arguments, and then this is my return. This is what I'm returning. Okay, now what you can observe here is there can be any number of arguments, which means it can be x, y, z or anything, but there is only one expression that need to be returned. Okay, whatever the expression that I'm going to give, it should be a single expression. That is the reason these are called very short or small anonymous functions. If there are bigger ones, you can go ahead and use a normal conventional way of defining a function and use that. But when your function itself is pretty small, then this is the ideal way to do it. Okay, now this is absolutely fine. If I what has happened, invalid syntax. Why is this invalid? No. Now if I go ahead and add num and I can give 12 comma 13, this will return me 25. Did you guys understand this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So good. I mean, this is a good way to understand how your normal function can be used, and this can be converted into a short anonymous function, which is known as lambda function, and how this is very much similar to what we do in JavaScript, where we used to have a arrow function or function expression. Very similar way, more relatable to arrow function when you have only one parameter and a single expression or single statement in your block of code. That is only one return statement is existing. That is when arrow function was more useful. And now in lambda function acts the similar way. It is a short anonymous way of writing a function in Python.